Welcome back guys, and in this lesson we'll be looking at Linux history. Now when it comes to Linux history, even before I speak about what is the beginning of Linux or how Linux evolved, we need to look at the evolution of computers. So let us start with evolution of computers. If you all know, like when the computers were developed or introduced, they were of very big size, right? Big size systems, non affordable, and I think when the computers were developed the first time, they were as big as small houses that we have. Pretty big systems, and they were not so easy to be affordable by a normal person. When the computers first started to evolve, every company had a different operating system. They used to buy the hardware, they used to create their own operating system, and they used to run the computers as per their own company norms, right? So the evolution of computers, it starts with pretty big sizes, big systems, and non affordable. These were the main criteria when computers started. With different companies buying in the hardware and different companies introducing their own operating system, the issue was each computer was developed for a specific purpose. That means every system had a specific purpose. Like one server will have a specific purpose, one workstation will have a specific purpose, but there was no standardized operating system across all the systems or the servers or the workstations, right? So different companies created different operating systems, and this was purely done to solve specific purpose, right? So each company had their monopoly, they had their own systems, own operating systems, and it was purely towards solving one specific purpose. The problem was these systems were extremely costly, because in those days when computers were created initially, the hardware cost was very high. If you compare this with mobile phones also, initially when mobile phones were created they were very costly, but now today if you see, the demand is so high that the hardware costs have gone down and anyone can purchase a mobile phone. The same is with computers. Today you can get computers for very cheap amount, like each and every company, there are so many companies that are creating computers, there is so much competition. So when demand increases, when competition increases, definitely the prices will come down. But when computers were first started, it was not easy for anyone to afford a computer, and that's why only companies used to afford computers, and they were extremely costly. Also in those days, it was a specific skill that was required in order to understand and learn computers. So for a normal person it was impossible to learn and understand computers or the operating systems. Every company had a skilled labor, skilled people who were able to operate and work on these specific computers, right? So that's the main evolution of computers, and that's how it started. Now understand this guys, with this evolution there was definitely a problem. The problem is every company had its own monopoly when it comes to hardware or the computer's operating system. They developed their own operating system, so there is no standardization of the operating system when it comes to computers and the companies that build their own operating system. That's why what happened is, in 1969 a team of developers, they started at Bell Labs. I'm not sure, but many of you might have heard about Bell Labs or Bell Laboratories. That's where the C language was developed first. So that's the same lab where a team of developers, they thought, why not we build a standard operating system that can be used across computers, so that people do not have to worry about the hardware and people also do not have to worry about the software. So initially the worry or the problem or the cost was regarding the hardware, and then there was another cost to build an operating system for specific computers. So to reduce that cost, the developers thought, why not we create a standard operating system so that people can purchase a standard hardware, people can purchase or install the standard operating system, and then continue the development or use their applications. So that's when it started, or that's the beginning of Unix, beginning of Unix operating system. In 1969, a team of developers started at Bell Labs. So that's where this beginning of Unix operating system started. Now you might say that, Arun, I think we are learning about Linux. I'll come to Linux in some time, but I think we have to understand the evolution of computers, what is Unix, and then we'll look into what exactly is Linux. The goal was very simple. The goal was to create a pretty common software for all the computers, right? Because all companies were developing their own operating system. It was a pretty hard job. So they wanted to standardize the process. So the goal of this project, the goal of the Unix project was very simple. To create goal was to create common software for all computers. So with this, when they started with this project, the project was named as Unix. Project name was Unix. So they named the project as Unix and started to work towards one common goal, and that was to create a common software for all the computers. Now we also know that the Bell Labs is famous for developing the C language. What they did is they started developing the Unix or the Unix operating system on C language. So they used C language to develop Unix OS instead of assembly language. Guys, please forgive me in case I make any typing errors or spelling mistakes, because I'm not that good at spellings. Now the team had a further goal when it comes to the development of the Unix operating system, and the goal was to create a code that is easy to understand and it is reusable or recyclable. Now this code or this recyclable code is known as kernel. We will be looking about kernel in our upcoming sessions, but for now just understand that the recyclable code is known as kernel. So what exactly is kernel? Kernel is the part of the operating system, because an operating system has multiple components. Kernel is responsible to speak with the hardware and the software. So that's the part which is directly speaking to your computer hardware. So that's kernel inside the Linux. Of course, we'll be looking at kernel in our next session. Don't worry about it. Now, because this kernel, as it is recyclable, it is used to develop the operating system and enhance the features. So what many people do is they use this kernel because it's a standard code and they can develop their own flavors of Unix by modifying the kernel or the software that talks to the kernel or the applications that talk to the kernel, because kernel is a standard layer that will speak to the hardware. See, earlier you had to develop an operating system that is speaking directly to the hardware. Now you have a layer that's kernel or a mediator that is responsible to speak to the hardware. So we need to create applications that can only speak directly to kernel, because we have kernel to speak with the hardware. It was not required to develop the applications that will speak directly to the hardware. We have a standard layer of kernel, so the applications will speak to kernel and kernel will speak to the hardware. So coming back to the main point, that's kernel, as it is recyclable, it is used to develop the OS and enhance its features. That's the main use of kernel. Now, the one more goal of this project was to develop the Unix operating system with open source code. That means the Unix operating system code is open for anyone. Anyone can read the kernel, anyone can modify the kernel as per their requirement, and anyone can use the kernel and build some other flavor of Unix operating system. So the source code, I think, is open source. What you can do is you can take the portion or the component of kernel, the Unix kernel, and build your own operating system or change the components as you want. As Unix was a complex operating system in the beginning, it was only found in universities, government organizations, and big corporates. Again, guys, as we have just seen that the source code for Unix is open source, what happened is companies used to create their own Unix flavor, and that's how a couple of companies they started creating their own flavor of Unix. Like we have IBM AIX, that's the Unix operating system. We have HP UX, that's another operating system or the Unix operating system that is built by HP. And then we have Sun Solaris, that's again another flavor of Unix that is built by Sun Systems. I think Sun is now acquired by Oracle. So that's about the beginning of the Unix operating system. So basically, the goal was to create a standard operating system for all the computer hardwares so that people do not have to worry, or the new corporations do not have to worry when it comes to developing their own operating system. So what they did is they created a standard or a recyclable code that is known as kernel. Kernel was directly responsible to speak with the computer hardware, and the applications were forced to speak directly to kernel rather than the hardware. Now this allowed companies to develop their own flavor of Unix, like IBM developed AIX, HP developed UX, and Sun Solaris developed their own Solaris operating system. That's all about the beginning of Unix and how Unix operating system came into market. Now you might have question like how Linux came into picture, and I think that's our next topic, how Linux came into picture. So guys, this Unix operating system, because it was an initial operating system, it was complex or pretty hard to configure. Only big corporations can afford to use Unix, modify and use it for their own purpose. There was this guy with name Linus Torvalds. I think he was a student in Finland, and his goal was to create or design a freely available academic version of Unix. And that's how this project of Linux started. So one simple guy or one normal guy in 1991 named Linus Torvalds. I think now you can feel like why this operating system is named as Linux, because the creator name was Linus. So instead of S, he changed it to X. So Linus Torvalds, a student at I'm not sure, somewhere in Finland, some university student at Finland, and his goal was to create a freely available academic version of Unix. That was his goal. So what he did was he started writing his own code, only for his own PC. There was no intentions to create a pretty big operating system that will challenge Unix operating system. No. The goal was to create a freely available academic version of Unix, but he only wanted to create it for his own personal system. And the main reason for doing this or this goal was because he was not able to afford the Unix operating system. Linus started the project because he was not able to afford the Unix OS. Now, initially, Linus was not at all aware about how big this project can go as he started for his own PC. But today, we all know that Linux is almost everywhere. So, he had no idea about how big this project would become. One funny thing is, initially, he named it as, I think the project name was Frax. I'm not sure why would he come up with this kind of name, but he changed it to Linux. I think Linux is more inclined towards his name, so he changed Unix and created his own operating system, that's Linux. So initially, what he did was, because I think it might be because of his ego, or as he was not able to afford the Unix operating system, he created the Linux operating system free but restricted it for the commercial use. Because Unix was commercial operating system and it was hard for people to use Unix for their own purpose, that's why he created Linux free, like anyone can use it, but not for commercial purpose. So companies or the big corporations could not purchase or use the Linux operating system for their own purpose. So he created the Linux OS under his own license but restricted it for commercial use. Because initially he was working for his own PC, so he created the OS only under his own license and completely restricted it for the commercial use. But I think the guy was good. So in 1992 he released Linux under GNU, that's General Public License. So today any company can use Linux operating system because it's completely free. You don't need to have a license. Now you might have these questions, like a couple of students, they come to me and say like, Arun, you mentioned Linux is free, but why Red Hat Linux is chargeable? See, the Linux operating system is free, but Red Hat charges you for taking their support. So Linux operating system is free, but the vendor or the flavor or the company that is giving you their own license, they will definitely charge for their support. Like CentOS, 100% free. But when you try to go for the support, I think CentOS does not have any support. So let's look at some other example like Ubuntu. If you want to install Ubuntu, it's all free. But if you want to take their Ubuntu team support, then it's chargeable. So technically Linux is free. Anyone can use the Linux operating system. Nowadays it's everywhere. Linux is almost everywhere. Linux is everywhere. Now let me give you what all places Linux operating system is used. It is used in supercomputers. It is used in laptops. It's used in tablets, mobiles, and routers, washing machines, and then I guess it's in watches, servers, cars. I think it's used almost everywhere, right? So that's the beauty of Linux operating system. A small guy, Linus Torvalds, thought of starting a side project for his own personal computer to develop a freely available academic version of Unix operating system, but ended up creating one of the biggest or the most used operating system right now on this planet. So that's about the evolution of computers, beginning of Unix, and how Linux came into picture. Let us look at some of the Linux features that make it one of the most demandable operating systems right now. So Linux features. What are these Linux features? So the first feature that I want to discuss is it is multi-user operating system. What's the meaning of multi-user? That means multiple users can connect to the same operating system from different terminals and utilize the hardware resources like RAM, hard disk, and work on the operating system simultaneously. So it's not like one user is connected to the operating system and the other user will not be able to connect to the operating system until the first user logs out. Nothing like that. Multiple users can connect to the same operating system and work on the Linux OS. The next Linux feature is multitasking. That means the tasks or the system calls or the user requests inside the Linux operating system. What happens is it is so intelligent that it is able to divide the tasks and work on multiple tasks based on the CPU threads. So all the tasks are divided and they are executed parallelly when it comes to CPU threads. So multiple CPU threads will execute multiple user requests, and that's why this term multitasking came into picture. The next feature about Linux is portability. Now, portability does not mean that you can take the Linux operating system in your pen drive or on a CD. Of course, you can do that. But the main point when it comes to portability is you can install Linux on any hardware. It's so easy. Like we have just now seen the places where we can find the Linux operating system. So that means Linux is easily portable onto different types of hardwares. The next great feature about Linux is security. Like inside Linux, we have authentication. When you try to connect to the Linux operating system, definitely you need to provide the user ID and password. When you try to access a file, then you have permissions. You need to have permissions in order to access the file. And again, the files can be encrypted inside the operating system so that it converts it into a format that is not readable when someone else tries to open it who doesn't have the permissions. So Linux is highly secure. The next great feature about Linux is, guys, initially the Unix and Linux operating systems, they were developed with the character based interface. Now today we also have the GUI interface for Linux operating system, where if you install some packages you can use Linux in GUI. And by the way guys, one important thing, the Mac operating system, it is built on Unix OS, just for your understanding. The next great feature about Linux is it has a great file system. So what is a file system? A file system allows you to arrange your files and directories in a systematic order. Now, as we progress along inside this course, you will understand about the file system because we will be creating the files inside the Linux OS once we install the Linux operating system. And the best part about Linux is it is open source. That means anyone can freely download, install, and use Linux operating system. Amazing guys, we have seen a couple of great topics in this lecture. We have seen and talked about the evolution of computers, how computers started, and then why Unix operating system project started at Bell Laboratories, and what was the need of a guy called Linus Torvalds to develop his own operating system, and that became the Linux operating system, and what are the important features of Linux OS. That's all for this lecture guys, and I think in our next lecture we'll be looking at the difference between Unix and Linux operating system in detail, so that you get to know what are the difference or what is the difference between Unix and Linux operating system at ground level. So we'll be using some comparison matrix to understand why Linux is different from Unix operating system. Thank you so much for now, and I'll quickly see you in the next lecture.